In the forests of northern Louisiana, hidden beneath decades of vegetation, lies a secret that rewrote American history. This is Watson Break. Built around 3500 BCE, it's the oldest known earthwork complex in North America. That's 5,400 years ago, older than Stonehenge, older than the Egyptian pyramids. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists believed that complex societies couldn't exist without agriculture. They thought monument building required farmers with surplus crops and rigid social hierarchies. Watson Break proves them wrong. The site was discovered by Vrika Bamberg Jones, a local resident, more than 30 years ago after a timber company cleared the land. What she found looked like natural hills at first, but something about the pattern seemed off. The mounds were too evenly spaced, too deliberately arranged. When archaeologists finally investigated in the 1990s, radiocarbon dating revealed the truth. These weren't natural formations. They were ancient monuments built by hunter-gatherers during the Middle Archaic period. And the dates kept coming back the same, 3500 BCE, give or take a century. The paper announcing Watson Break's true age was published in 1997. It fundamentally changed how archaeologists think about early American societies. Complexity, it turns out, doesn't require farming. It just requires people willing to work together toward a common goal.
Watson Break consists of 11 earthen mounds connected by ridges. Together, they form an oval measuring 984 by 656 feet. That's roughly 3 football fields long and 2 wide. The mounds themselves range from 3 feet to 25 feet tall. 2 curved ridges link groups of earthworks called the North Mounds and South Mounds. These ridges weren't just pathways. They were integral parts of the design, creating an enclosed space in the center, an arena, a gathering place, a ceremonial ground. The largest mound, Mound E, stands 25 feet high. To put that in perspective, that's taller than a 2-story building. And remember, this was built by people carrying dirt in baskets, one load at a time. No wheels, no metal tools, no pack animals. Archaeological studies using extensive coring and stratigraphic analysis have revealed how Watson Break was built. They didn't construct it all at once. Minor earthworks were begun around 3500 BCE in association with an oval arrangement of burned rocks. Then, over time, the mounds grew higher, the ridges more defined. 25 radiocarbon dates and 6 luminescence dates confirm the timeline. This wasn't a short-term project. Watson Break was used and modified over hundreds of years, potentially from 3500 BCE to 2800 BCE. 700 years of continuous significance. 7 centuries of people returning to this place. The people who built Watson Break belong to what archaeologists call the Evans culture. They were Middle Archaic hunter-gatherers who lived in the lower Mississippi Valley. But calling them simple hunter-gatherers would be a massive mistake. The Evans culture demonstrated a level of social organization that rivals any agricultural society of their time. They mobilized labor forces to move thousands of tons of earth. They maintain construction projects across multiple generations.
They created monuments that would outlast their civilization by millennia. Who were the leaders? We don't know. There's no evidence of kings or formal hierarchies, no palaces, no elite burials, no obvious markers of social stratification. Yet someone had to coordinate the work. Someone had to preserve the knowledge of why these mounds mattered. Someone had to convince hundreds or thousands of people to invest their labor in this project. Maybe leadership was seasonal, rotating among different families or clans. Maybe it was based on age, with elders directing younger workers. Maybe it was religious, with shamans or spiritual leaders guiding the construction. We may never know for certain. What we do know is that the Evans culture valued this place enough to keep coming back. Year after year, generation after generation, they returned to Watson Brake. They maintained the mounds, they performed ceremonies, they passed down the tradition.
One of the most remarkable aspects of Watson Brake is what the archaeological evidence tells us about diet. Fish provided as much as 80% of the meat eaten by the Evans culture. Catfish, freshwater drum, and sunfish were the primary species. The rivers were their supermarket. Fish otoliths, those are ear bones, preserve growth rings like trees. By studying these tiny bones, archaeologists can determine what season the fish were caught. The evidence shows year-round occupation, or at least regular seasonal returns to Watson Brake. But fish wasn't everything. They also ate freshwater mussels and aquatic snails, both abundant in the rivers and streams. For plant foods, they gathered goosefoot, marsh elder, fruits and nuts. Acorns and hickory nuts were particularly important. Grapes grew wild in the forests. This diet persisted throughout the entire occupation of Watson Brake. The same foods appear in archaeological deposits from 3500 BCE to 2800 BCE. This tells us something important. The environment was stable, and the people understood it intimately. Think about the knowledge required. When do catfish spawn? Where do they gather? What's the best way to catch them? When are acorns ripe? How do you process them to remove bitter tannins? Which mushrooms are safe? Which berries are poisonous? This was sophisticated ecological science, passed down through oral tradition. And here's the kicker. This abundance allowed them to invest time in monument building. They weren't struggling to survive. They had enough food security to dedicate labor to projects that didn't directly feed anyone. That's the definition of surplus, even without agriculture. How do you build an 11-mound complex without modern tools? The answer is simpler than you'd think, but the execution required extraordinary discipline and organization. They used woven baskets to carry earth. Each basket could hold between 30 and 50 pounds of soil. A strong adult could carry one basket at a time. Do that 10 times, and you've moved 300 to 500 pounds. Do it 100 times, and you've moved several tons. Multiply that by hundreds of people over dozens of years, and you've got Watson Brake. But they didn't just dig randomly. Archaeological evidence shows they selected specific soil types from specific locations. Some earth came from surface deposits. Other material came from deeper layers with different properties. They were engineering the mounds, choosing materials based on stability, drainage, and compaction.
The burned rock features found at the base of the mounds are particularly interesting. These may have served as foundations, providing stable bases for the earthworks. Or they might have been ceremonial, marking significant moments in the construction process. One thing's certain, this wasn't casual work. The mounds are too precisely shaped, too deliberately placed. Someone understood geometry, even if they didn't have written mathematics. Someone knew about load bearing, erosion, and structural integrity. And they did all this with stone tools. No metal existed in their world. Cutting tools were made of chipped stone. Digging implements were wooden sticks, possibly hardened by fire. Everything was done by human muscle power and human ingenuity.
At the heart of Watson Brake, enclosed by the 11 mounds and connecting ridges, lies an oval open space. This is the central plaza, and it's the key to understanding what Watson Brake actually was. This wasn't a village. There's limited evidence of permanent residential structures within the complex. Watson Brake was something else, a ceremonial center, a meeting ground, a place where people gathered for specific purposes at specific times. Imagine it 3,500 years ago. Groups arrive from different parts of the region, following rivers and forest paths they've known since childhood. They bring trade goods, stories, news from distant territories. They come for ceremonies, for festivals, for collective work projects. The plaza becomes the center of activity, dancing, feasting, ritual performances. Elders share histories, young people court, children play, and all around them, the mounds rise like ancient witnesses, growing slightly higher with each generation's contribution. This pattern, seasonal aggregation at a ceremonial center, makes sense for hunter-gatherers. For most of the year, small bands spread across the landscape, hunting and gathering in their territories. But at certain times, they come together. These gatherings strengthen social bonds, facilitate trade, arrange marriages, and renew cultural traditions. Watson Brake wasn't unique in this function. Other Middle Archaic mound sites existed in the region, though Watson Brake is the largest and oldest we found. This suggests a network of related communities, all participating in a shared cultural system.
Why did they build Watson Brake? That's the question that haunts every archaeologist who studies the site. We can describe what they built and how they built it, but the why remains elusive. The most likely answer involves spiritual and ceremonial purposes. The labor investment was too great for purely practical functions. These mounds weren't defensive fortifications. They weren't grain storage facilities. They weren't residential platforms to escape flooding. They were something more important. Many indigenous cultures across the Americas and around the world build mounds as connections between earth and sky. They create elevated spaces for ritual, for offerings, for communication with the spirit world. Watson Brake likely served similar functions. The oval arrangement might have astronomical significance. Many ancient monuments align with solar or lunar events, solstices, equinoxes, significant risings or settings. While we can't prove this for Watson Brake without more extensive archaeoastronomical study, it's a reasonable hypothesis. The mounds may also have served as burial monuments, though evidence for this at Watson Brake is limited. Later mound cultures in the same region definitely used earthworks as burial places for important individuals. The tradition may have started here. What's certain is that Watson Brake held deep meaning for the Evans culture. You don't invest 700 years of labor into something you don't care about. This place was sacred. It was important. It was worth maintaining across dozens of generations.
To understand Watson Brake, we need to understand the world it existed in. The Middle Archaic period, from roughly 6,000 to 3,000 BCE, was a time of environmental transition in North America. The last ice age had ended thousands of years earlier. Sea levels had risen to near modern levels. Forests had expanded northward. River systems had stabilized into patterns we recognize today. The climate was warm and relatively stable. In Louisiana, this meant rich bottomland forests along rivers and streams, cypress swamps, oak and hickory uplands, an abundance of fresh water, and most importantly, productive fisheries that provided reliable protein year-round. This environmental context is crucial. Watson Brake worked because of where it was located. The site sits in the floodplain of the Ouachita River near Monroe in northern Louisiana. This placement gave the Evans culture access to multiple ecological zones within walking distance. River for fishing, bottomland for tubers and aquatic plants, upland forests for nuts and game, wetlands for waterfowl and mussels. This diversity meant that food shortages were rare. Even if one resource failed, others remained available. Compare this to other regions during the same period. In the Middle East, agriculture had already begun, driven partly by environmental pressures and growing populations. In Europe, Neolithic farmers were spreading across the continent. But in Louisiana, the environment was so productive that farming wasn't necessary. Hunter-gatherers could achieve complexity without it. Watson Brake didn't exist in isolation, and its influence didn't end when the site was abandoned around 2800 BCE. It was part of a long tradition of mound building in the Mississippi Valley that continued for thousands of years. After Watson Brake came Poverty Point, built between 1700 and 1100 BCE in the same region. Poverty Point was larger, more complex, with extensive trade networks, but the basic pattern was the same. Hunter-gatherers building monumental earthworks. Later came the Adena culture around 1000 BCE, then the Hopewell culture around 200 BCE. Both were mound builders. Both demonstrated increasing social complexity. Both maintained extensive trade networks. Finally, the Mississippian culture arose around 800 CE, building the largest pre-Columbian earthworks in North America, including Cahokia near modern-day St. Louis. These were true cities with thousands of permanent residents, social hierarchies, and agricultural economies. This sequence shows us something important. Watson Brake was the beginning, not an isolated anomaly. It established a pattern that would be repeated and elaborated for over 4,000 years. Mound building became a defining characteristic of indigenous cultures in eastern North America. The question is, did later cultures know about Watson Brake? Was there continuity of tradition? Or did each culture independently develop mound building? We don't have definitive answers.
By the time Europeans arrived, no indigenous people remembered Watson Break. The forest had reclaimed it completely. But traditions can persist in subtle ways. Stories, songs, place names, spiritual concepts. Maybe some echo of Watson Break survived influencing cultures that came thousands of years later. Today, Watson Break faces challenges. The site is on private property. It's not protected as a national or state park. Timber operations, erosion, and development threaten what remains. Some of the mounds are still there, overgrown with trees and vegetation. Others have been damaged or destroyed. Unlike Poverty Point, which achieved UNESCO World Heritage status, Watson Break remains relatively unknown and unprotected. This is more than an archaeological tragedy. Watson Break is part of American heritage. It proves that indigenous peoples of North America achieved complexity and sophistication thousands of years before European contact. It challenges narratives that portray pre-Columbian America as primitive or undeveloped. Watson Break shows us that human ingenuity takes many forms. You don't need writing to record important knowledge. You don't need metal to build monuments. You don't need agriculture to create complex societies. What you need is cooperation, organization, and a vision worth working toward. The people who built Watson Break looked at a landscape and saw possibility. They imagined something that didn't exist yet and then made it real. They invested their labor not for themselves, but for future generations. 700 years of continuous meaning. 7 centuries of returning, maintaining, adding. And now, 5,400 years later, we're still trying to understand what they accomplished. The mounds remain, silent witnesses to a forgotten civilization. They remind us that history is deeper than we often imagine, that sophistication comes in many forms, that people without writing can still change the world. 5,400 years ago, in the forests of what would one day be called Louisiana, people came together to build something extraordinary. They moved earth by the basket load. They shaped mounds with stone tools and human hands. They created Watson Break. We don't know their names. We don't know their stories. We don't know what ceremonies they performed or what songs they sang, but we know they were here. We know they were sophisticated. We know they achieved something archaeologists once believed impossible. Watson Break is a reminder that history belongs to all people, that greatness comes in many forms, that the human spirit, when working together toward a common goal, can accomplish the impossible. The Evans culture is gone. Their language is lost. Their traditions have faded. But the mounds remain. And as long as they remain, Watson Break stands as testimony to what people can achieve. Not through conquest, not through domination, but through cooperation, dedication, and vision. This is Watson Break. Built in 3500 BCE, the oldest monumental earthworks in North America. A civilization remembered not through writing, but through the earth itself. And that's a legacy that will outlast us all.